than the 62nd pick in the draft. I think they could have gotten something in the 40s or 50s maybe, which would have still given them a chance to get a better player and to add more depth to this roster. Instead, they got cute. They didn't want to show their hand, so they lost all their leverage because then the Giants drafted quarterbacks, so they're out. The Patriots decide, well, we'll just wait for the draft at this point versus giving up a second-round pick. It was really Miami that was all that's left. So the fact that they were able to get a second with losing all their leverage, still pretty good for them. But, Eric, I think 2 weeks ago or so, I think they could have done better. From the Giants' standpoint, to bring them back into this mess, Eric, I don't understand why they didn't even try to trade the 37th pick in this draft and be able to go get two really good, talented players at 6 and 17 and get a potential starting quarterback if they're going to play Eli next year anyways. I felt like they botched this draft up so bad when you see what Rosen went for and the fact that they used that 37th pick to jump back up and get a corner. They could have had Josh Allen or Ed Oliver at 6. They could have used 17 to move back and collect more picks. Heck, maybe get another second-round pick, and you still would have had Murphy and Greedy Williams and all these other corners that went basically from the end of the first round through the first 15 picks of the second round. They could have grabbed one of those guys and gotten more picks and had Josh Rosen. So what could happen is down the road, the Giants could look really bad because they could have come out of this draft with 3 really good players, and God only knows what they could have gotten if they would have just moved around in the draft, as much as we saw teams willing to jump up into that first round, at the end of the first round, and even the movement in the second round. So I just think that there was a lot of involved here, but I think the only one that really made a good move was the Dolphins.
Wow. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I think those hot takes are very valid and some very good points there. So, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the Miami Dolphins have any kind of a roster that's going to make Josh Rosen shine, but I am not sure what his overall potential can be. It's sort of like a Jared Goff situation. Does Rosen come out in year 2 or year 3 and look like a different player than he did in year 1? So, Justin, I know this wasn't in the notes, but now I got to ask you, because you brought up Daniel Jones, you brought up the Giants, which I totally agree with you on that. The Giants, in my opinion, they just didn't have a very good draft. So however, looking on Twitter at the reactions to the Daniel Jones, I think it's something like hashtag Daniel Jones reactions or something like that. I'm probably getting that wrong. But either way, if you go out on Twitter and look for Giants fans reacting to the pick when Daniel Jones' name was announced, some of them are really funny. It's quite hilarious. So I have to ask you, quick question. It's not in the notes, but as we wrap up this quick NFL talk-worthy segment, in your mind, let's say, I don't know, let's even say 3 years from now, who has the best standing in the league out of these 3 quarterbacks? Kyler Murray, Josh Rosen, or Daniel Jones?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think for Rosen, I think the problem for him, like you said, can he have a Jared Goff kind of ascension to his career? I think the problem will be trying to find him a roster that has the talent around him that the Rams were able to put around Goff and a coaching staff that believed in him and actually the time. The problem for him has been he hasn't had that. There's been a revolving door of offensive coordinators in Arizona. The coach was only there 1 year. He was a defensive-minded guy. Mike McCoy got booted. Then you're bringing in Byron Leftwich with really no experience at play calling. So for him, it's just been a calamity of errors throughout his career. And now he's going to a team that seems to be doing the NFL version of what the Sixers did, stripping the roster and trying to add draft picks. So from that standpoint, Eric, I think I'm going to go with Kyler Murray. It feels like Arizona is all behind him. Now, I'm a little bit concerned about their weapons, but they did add 3 wide receivers in the draft. So if they're willing to give Cliff Kingsbury some time and they're not ready to push the panic button after the first season, I think that they can put a system in place where he can have some success. And I don't know in 3 years if Rosen's going to even get that chance. And the way Gettleman loves Eli, hell, Eric, next year he might give him a 2 or 3 year contract extension. So I'll take Kyler Murray because he seems like he's at least the guy who will be there in 3 years from now. All right, Eric, so the last topic this week on our little bit shorter, truncated podcast. Last week we went a little long, so we're going to try to shorten this one up. But NASCAR was at Talladega this week. Talladega, Daytona, these restrictor plates, normally some of the best races on the track because you kind of know that the cars are going to be in a big pack, going to be racing tight all day long, and you're going to get a lot of action. And Sunday didn't disappoint as there was a ton of lead changes and passing at the front of this field, passes for the lead under green flag, what we actually got to see that Fox wasn't in commercial for. But Eric, late in this race, NASCAR continues to try to figure out ways to end these races under green. And now they're racing once they take the white flag if something happens. There's all these different rules that NASCAR keeps putting in, but we saw on that last lap, we saw a lot of things happen including Ricky Stenhouse Jr. getting into the wall with no caution being called, and then Kyle Larson flipping down the backstretch. Chase Elliott gets the win. But this race had you fired up on how it ended, so I'm going to turn it over to you, man. I want to hear your take on what you thought about the race and that last lap on Sunday.
Yeah, Justin, I am very concerned. As a NASCAR fan, I think we've gone a long time without anything bad happening. And you look at this package, you look at the way that NASCAR tries to continue to make racing better at all of the super speedways and all of the 1.5 mile tracks, and that's great. But they continue to try to do the opposite here at Talladega and Daytona. And I don't mean the opposite in making the racing bad. I mean, they try to make these cars stay as close together as possible, or at least it seems that they do. I know they've added some ways that they can draft past each other, the ways that they can get outside and drive these cars. They have a lot of good handling on them so that you can pull out and pass. But when push comes to shove and you're coming down with 10 to go, these guys are in a large pack. They can run 3 and 4 wide, and there's virtually no separation between these cars. And I think that's what NASCAR likes, because it's a fantastic show for the fans. Now, I'll sit here and admit that I am glued to my television set during these races typically, and I'm not looking for wrecks. What bothers me the most is that Fox and NBC and whoever's doing the coverage, they lead in with the big one. I mean, that is their hook. That is what they show the fans. They show them all these wrecks. That's the way they're selling tickets to this. I think that's the wrong approach, but it's what they want. It's what they want you to see, is that these cars are all under a blanket. They're going down the backstretch at 202 miles an hour. And when someone makes a mistake of 4 to 5 inches, it sets off a chain reaction into a huge wreck that they call the big one. We haven't seen the quote-unquote big one over the last couple of years, and I think that's due to a couple of things. Number one, I think the drivers are getting used to just driving these cars better. I mean, I'm not saying we have better drivers, but these cars are more stable, they're more drivable. It's easier to save them when they get sideways. I mean, we actually saw that a couple times. Ryan Blaney, he should have wrecked about 3 times during this race, being so loose up in the outside, and he saved it every time. It just goes to show you not only the talent of these drivers, but how drivable these cars can be. And I think that gives these drivers even more confidence to just go balls to the wall all the time. The problem with that is that there hasn't been a situation because of the safer barriers and other things where something has happened. And so it just encourages this NASCAR move to keep these guys under a blanket the whole time. Here's what fires me up. Kyle Larson at the end of that race, and even there was a couple of smaller wrecks during the race, these guys are hitting the wall a ton, and the walls have a safer barrier on them, and they're always getting out. But at the end of the race, Kyle Larson had a wreck that was extremely scary because his car went down into the inside of the backstretch, which is now pavement. It's supposed to help them brake or at least get some friction on the tires to slow down. But his car, about halfway through that macadam, actually started to lift off of the ground. The car wasn't even backwards. It was sideways. And we haven't seen cars lifting off the ground like that in a while. So now they've got, once again, a shape to the car and a package where it seems like these cars are a little bit easier to get over. We saw that almost a couple of cars getting over throughout the race. Anyway, he gets up into the air, and Justin, he almost missed the safer barrier because the front end of his car was off the ground. Had he missed that safer barrier, his car would have gone into the catch fence. It might have, because that fence right there probably isn't as strong as the one on the front stretch. His car could have gone through it, potentially wrecking into some of the RVs that are sitting right behind there. It could have been a absolute mess, and I mean with loss of life and everything. But let's even go beyond that. The fact is, he hit the wall, and then his car flipped over 3 or 4 or 5 times, and he gets out. That's great. I mean, as a Kyle Larson fan, I'm glad he got out. It took my breath away a little bit, seeing him hit the wall that hard. Jeffrey Earnhardt hit the wall a ton. Some of the other guys hit the wall a ton during the race. Justin, one of these times, these guys aren't going to get out. One of them's going to get the pit call from the crew chief. Hey, are you all right? There's not going to be any response. Justin, I'm worried that NASCAR is not paying attention to the bigger picture here. They're getting these guys to race all the time at these super speedways in a tight pack, and they're selling the big one. But what happens when they sell that so much that they get a result that they don't want? I think it's going to take another Dale Earnhardt Sr. moment. That's what scares me. That's what concerns me. We've seen guys hit a ton and walk away. at what point are you just becoming too complacent as a series? Because, Justin, the drivers hate this kind of racing. They absolutely hate it. They know that when they strap into one of their cars on Daytona or Talladega, it's Russian roulette. Half of them are going to get wrecked. Half of them aren't. But if you're in the half that gets wrecked, do you walk away? Really, as a race car driver, the worst situation you can be in. They want to race. They want to go out there and run fast and pass and have a good handling car. They don't want to say, okay, well, I might be in the half that is upside down and wrecked at 180 miles an hour straight into the wall today. That's not what they're looking for. But NASCAR is, because they love it. And they sell it on TV with the big one, and they sell it on their media, their social media, clips, and everything else. It reminds me a lot of the NFL when Chris Carter and some of these other people had these sayings like, oh, he got jacked up. And then the NFL cut that off because there was concussions and they didn't want attention to draw to that situation when guys are getting jacked up and knocked out on the football field. Well, NASCAR is going to do the same thing. They're going to sell the big one. They're going to sell this wreck package all the time on social media until one of these guys gets killed.
I think you hit it right on the head when you talked about what NASCAR wants and the fact that they're kind of a little bit blinded to it right now because nothing has happened. So they have this air of invincibility around them. Oh, we've made the cars so much safer than they were. And we have safer barriers and everything's as safe as it's ever been. That doesn't mean that bad things can't happen. We saw what happened to Austin Dillon's car a few years ago at Daytona, that it looked like a can opener going through that fence. It barely contained it back into the racetrack without hurting him or any of the fans. You're right, Eric. The drivers, they don't like plate racing, and NASCAR loves it. And it's 4 times a year that NASCAR doesn't have to answer questions about competition on the racetrack. They only really have to worry about if they botch something up like a late race caution or they don't throw it or they do throw it. I'm really shocked that there hasn't been more that's come out about as hard as Ricky Stenhouse Jr. hit on the front stretch with a camera on him, and NASCAR did not throw the caution flag. Then they come to the backstretch and they have a pretty horrific wreck where, like you said, some really bad things could have happened. And technically, Eric, that wreck shouldn't really have ever happened because as hard as Stenhouse hit, the caution probably should have flown at that point, ended the race. Even if Chase Elliott and the leaders had just crossed the line, they probably should have ended that race and that wreck never could have happened. So they could have hurt one of their young stars or hurt a fan and really gone against their own rules about when they throw caution flags. So that's another part. We talk about, again, in the NBA in segment 1, NASCAR is just as bad. They are one of the most inconsistent sports week in, week out with their rules. They constantly are chasing their tail trying to make fans happy. Next time, they'll throw a caution. The fans will complain about it on Twitter. Then they won't throw the caution. You just have to get consistency, and you can't care what fans think. You just have to call things down the line. And if people know you're going to do that, they'll stop complaining about it until you decide to actually change a rule to something else that you can then be consistent with. But you can't have a rule in place and then constantly change it. So I don't think that they're ever going to change their plate racing, Eric. I think they like it too much. They know it's a draw for the fans. They don't care what the drivers think. If the drivers don't like it, they'll move along. They've got the next young crop that'll come in. That's just always been NASCAR's attitude. They're bigger than one driver. They're bigger than 2 drivers. They can just put anybody in those cars and fans are going to continue to watch them. And we've seen that may or may not be true, the way that the ratings have dropped as some of these bigger names have left the sport. And you're probably going to have another wave here soon. The only difference for NASCAR will be they really don't have that popular of a driver that's left. Chase Elliott may be the most popular driver in the sport, and he's a younger guy, so he's not going anywhere for a while. But you're right, Eric. We talk about it a lot amongst ourselves, and we're on the road a lot. You see people texting and all over the place, and there's just people have this air of invincibility around them, like, that won't happen to me. That's kind of what NASCAR has fallen into. And you sort of saw them fall into that trap before Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s wreck. They really didn't have a lot of safety initiative guys at that time. Earnhardt was still running an open face helmet. The Hans device wasn't a required tool. They didn't have safer barriers at that time. It was just, we're just going to go out and race. And then they lost the biggest name in the sport. And they really haven't had to deal with that since that time. Well, if you continue to put these drivers in a position where things like what happened to Larson happen, a few inches could change the outcome of a race and could change the outcome of racing and the drivers or fans' lives.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's because it hasn't happened that they're getting complacent. And I like that point that you made. A couple of inches, one way or the other, could totally change the way that wreck looks. And you only get one chance. You only get one chance at it. That's the problem with the Earnhardt situation. You only get one wreck like that that doesn't go well. and there is no second chance. So, oh man, that's just a